Clint Coons here, and we're going to talk about anonymity today, and I'm going to teach you how to basically go about and make sure that your entities, that if somebody's looking at them, they're not going to trace it back to you or your property. And there's different ways you can do this, and so we're going to be covering how to use certain entities to obtain anonymity to protect your assets, because I firmly believe that when you're setting these structures up, anonymity is always going to be your best defense. And I tell people that over and over again, that by having an anonymity structure, what you're doing is you're limiting your overall risk exposure, because no one wants to sue the indigent defendant, the person that has no assets. And if you can put yourself in a position where you appear to not own anything, well, that's half the battle right there. Because at the end of the day, what we want to do is we want to get our creditors, right, if they are coming after us as an attorney there, we want that attorney, that plaintiff's attorney, to take our policy limits and leave us alone and not try to go after our assets, because they look at you, they run an asset search, and they say, wow, there's a big, huge payday right here. This is the type of person that we want to sue. So what we're going to be doing then is discussing how that works. Sorry, just checking something out here. How that works so that you can make sure that all of your assets are totally protected. All right, let me see. I've got some things that we're going to go through just to make sure. Sometimes if you see me, I'm going to switch over to my iPad now, because I like to always draw on my iPad. If you got questions, throw the questions up there. I'll get to your questions in a bit after I go through the material. I know this topic, I've been getting a lot of comments. Hey, what about this? What about that? I've been telling people, just come to the event today and I'll answer your questions here, because this is the information that I'm sure many of you have the same types of questions. All right. So let's just talk about the different types of tools there are and how we go about creating anonymity for those. And the primary tools that we're going to discuss today are going to be limited liability companies and trusts, because really those are the only types of entities that we can use to create an anonymity structure. People will have come to me before and say, hey, what about a corporation? Can I set up a corporation and no one knows that I own it? Now, that doesn't work that way, because with traditional corporations, you have to disclose officers and directors. And so we're really limited to those types of entities that only require certain types of information that is required to be disclosed. And we can put entities into those positions. So that's how we build our anonymity structure. So I use limited liability companies. And on the trust side, we're going to talk about land trusts. We're going to talk about statutory trusts, which are business trusts. And we're going to talk about something you may not have heard about before. It's called a personal, I'm just going to go put this down, PPT, personal property trust. So these four entities right here, a combination thereof, is what I'm typically using when I'm working with clients to create anonymity around their structuring. So for example, if you came to me and you said, hey, I have this rental property and I would like to put that into a structure so that if anyone were to look at title here, they're not going to see my name down here as the owner of the property. Now, some people say, well, why would you want to do that? Well, it's quite simple, right? I don't want people to know that I have these assets. And if somebody gets a judgment against me, I don't want the judgment to attach to the asset, because that's what can happen. If I got a judgment against this individual, let's say this guy's name is Tom, I get a judgment against Tom, I just record the judgment in the county where Tom's property is located. And if that was a $200,000 judgment, it's going to stick to that house. And so Tom can't sell or refi without paying the judgment off. So Tom has an incentive to move that property out of his name, put it into something that his name is no longer associated with for asset protection, but B, for anonymity. So for real estate, what are our options? Well, option number one is you could create a limited liability company right here, an LLC. And typically this LLC would be set up in the state where the property is located. So if this property here was located in North Dakota, I would make this a North Dakota limited liability company. Now, when you're setting up the LLC, and I'm sure many of you have set up LLCs before, you'll notice that when you file them and you organize the limited liability company with the Secretary of State, you have to send in articles of organization. And most states, when you send in an article of organization, they want to know the name of the entity. So it doesn't matter what you call it, as long as you don't use your own name in the name, right? You don't call it Tom's LLC. Not a hell of a lot of anonymity there when Tom puts his own name in it. I've seen people do that before. Then you have to come up with a registered agent. Now, the registered agent could be you and your personal address. And again, that's a huge mistake. You never want to be your own registered agent. You want to use a third party. Okay, so obviously if we put Tom down here and his home address, anybody's going to be able to track this entity back to Tom. They want to know about a business address. So if you don't have a business address and it's going to be Tom's personal address, they're going to want to know who are the members or managers of this LLC. Well, if Tom's setting up an LLC, he has to decide, do I want this to be a member-managed limited liability company or a manager-managed LLC? Now, if you're not familiar with the difference between the two, a manager-managed LLC implies that you're going to have a manager control the company. A member-managed LLC means that the members are in control of the company. So there's two different types of management structures you can create when you form a limited liability company. What's important about this is that depending on the management structure you choose, if you choose number one, which is manager managed, then when you file your entity, many times the state will ask you to provide the manager's names and addresses. So if Tom set up a manager managed LLC, his name would go there. If he set it up as member managed and he happened to be the member, well, again, his name's going to show up there. And then last but not least, the person who submits this to the Secretary of State that does the filing, that fills out the articles of organization, the organizer is what we call them, they also have to disclose their information. So the organizer, if Tom's filling this out on his own and not having a third party do it, then his name will be listed on the organizational document. So as you can see, when many people create LLCs, maybe they use a third-party RA, so their name's not there. And maybe you have a PO box, so you're not using your home address for your business entity. But if you're the member or manager, well, sure as hell your name's going to be listed there. And if you sent in the articles, well, you're going to get listed there. So some way, somehow, people are going to be able to track this back to you. So when you're creating LLCs, and this goes for any type of limited liability company, if you want anonymity for your LLC that you're going to create, I don't care, even if it's not holding real estate, it's just a business enterprise, then what you want to do is structure it as follows. You know you need a North Carolina limited liability or North Dakota. We have to set one up there. But before I set that up, I'm going to create an LLC down here, either in Wyoming or Delaware. I'm going to set it up there, one of those two states. And the reason why I'm choosing those two states is because neither one of those states collects any information on the members or managers of the company. So when you set up, or we set up LLCs for our clients in, say, Wyoming, you have to come up with a name for the entity, right? You have to use a registered agent. That's Anderson. We serve as registered agent. I don't know how many, 15, 20,000 entities we're on. So it'd be Anderson there. Then they want to know a business address most of the time. This is where we step in. We provide our clients a business address. So we have mail forwarding. We put that on there. An address that goes on there. So people send mail. It comes to our office and we forward it on. Other services do it as well. And then they want to know who the organizer is. And since Anderson set it up, it's Anderson's name listed there. So nowhere on this entity will you see the name Tom, my client right here. He's completely hidden. So we create this Wyoming LLC. We set it up as a manager managed with Tom up here as the manager, and he's also the member. That is our foundation to create an anonymity structure. Now from there, what we're going to do is we're going to create this North Dakota LLC. And when I say we're going to create it, again, we can't let Tom go out and set this entity up now, because if he tries to set up the North Dakota LLC, it's going to screw everything up. But Anderson will go out and create it, or you're using a third party. What you want to make sure that you're doing there is, again, an RA. It's not going to be Tom. I'll just show you. It'll be Anderson here. The member, because we're going to make this entity here, we're going to set up as a member managed. entity, not a manager managed. Manager managed is this one. The upper tiers are always going to be member managed. And the reason why is that when we file, if the state asks us to provide the member's information, well, guess who the member is going to be? The blue box. So I will provide Blue Box's name. We'll just call this Blue Box LLC. I'll put Blue Box LLC on the statement of information or on the actual articles of organization. Wherever that information gets collected, I'll tell them Blue Box LLC. I'll give it Blue Box LLC's address, which is a Wyoming address or a Nevada address. And so all that gets pushed out to the state. So you create this North Dakota limited liability company with a third-party registered agent, with Blue Box LLC listed as its managing member. And then you have the organizer, that is the company, again, that prepares this. In our case, it's Anderson, listed there. So when someone looks at this red box here, it points them to the blue box. And if they look at the blue box, assuming they could find it, then it's going to point them to no one. And they're not going to know who's actually involved with this overall structure, because the anonymity of the blue box is what's protecting everything that's built on top of it. So you can build out an anonymity structure with LLCs like this. You just keep creating red boxes and they all point down to the blue box. Okay. Now, I started doing this about 18 years ago, 19 years ago, creating structures like this for my clients. And I started doing the same thing when I got active with my own investing. Now, one of the things that I realized in setting up this type of structure is that when it comes to operating the entity, that is these red boxes up here, these LLCs, when you go down and say you want to open up a bank account or you have to sign off on title docs or something like that, the problem that I started running into is that when I would go to sign off, sometimes they'd ask me for copies of my operating agreement, and they'd want to see a copy of the LLC operating agreement. Because if they looked at the Secretary of State's website and they didn't see my name associated with it, they had a concern. They would say, well, how do we know that this is your entity or you're authorized to make these decisions? So I would send them a copy of my red box operating agreement. Their legal counsel would review that, and they would see that everything points to this blue box right down here. Now, I signed off as a member of the blue box, as the member manager on the operating agreement, but that's never sufficient because every attorney wants to make sure they're crossing off every potential rabbit hole that their client could be exposed to. So then what they would ask for is copies of my blue box operating agreement. So what I decided to do is I said, all right, there's got to be a better way to do this. And I started appointing myself as a president of my red box LLCs. So now when they asked for a copy of my operating agreement, I sent it in and they would see me right there listed as the president with all the powers and authority over that box to make management and business decisions. So that got me through those issues I was running, those roadblocks that were slowing down closings and things like that. So what we started doing then at Anderson is setting up LLCs, these red boxes, where we would appoint people as a president or vice president of their company. So even though you have anonymity here, when you appoint someone as an officer, unlike a corporation where they list all that information with the Secretary of State, LLCs don't list officers. The Secretary of State does not ask for who the officers are of a limited liability company because that is not a traditional position in an LLC. Only the statute only asks for copies, as a manager or member. They don't ask for officers. So I found that this is the best way to do it, that if you want to build out a structure, you first start with Wyoming. Then when you're creating your red box, you set yourself up as an officer. Now, did that number of years. Everything's working great doing that. A couple years ago, I started seeing some issues start arising with lenders, other third parties asking for copies of the operating agreement. And even though they would see me as an officer, sometimes they would say, well, you know what, we still need the members to approve. We want to see who the members are. And so then I'd give them the blue box. And again, it would go through this legal process and slows things down. So I started saying, all right, I get it. Here's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to set this company up and I'm going to list myself on the operating agreement as the initial member. So when I draft my operating agreement for the red box, it would say Clint's the member. So I'm listed as the member manager since it's a member managed, and I'm listed as president. Then I will assign my interest over to the blue box. So any type of LLC that you're setting up that you want anonymity for, and you know you're going to be working with third parties and they're going to be asking for copies of your documents. If you're going to go down this road and you want to build anonymity, this is key right here. Do this. 2 things you need to do. 1, make yourself an officer. 2, set up your operating agreement with you listed as a member, and then assign your interest over to the blue box. So here's what happens. Whenever you have to provide this operating agreement to a third party, you don't give them the assignment, your transfer of interest that you made to the blue box to make the blue box the owner. You're just giving them the original operating agreement you signed. And so on that operating agreement, they see your name. And so you get past that next hurdle. You see, these are all the little things that you learn over time when you want to get deals done and you don't want people who don't understand what it is you're doing standing in your way and slowing down your closings or slowing the whole process up. So I like to do it this way, set up the LLC with the initial member being you on there. Now, sometimes states don't even ask for this. If you're in a state where it doesn't even ask for that type of information, doesn't ask for members or managers, great, because there are a few states out there other than Wyoming or Delaware, where you don't have to provide any information. So you can set up your operating agreement. I'll typically set them up as a manager managed, not a member managed. So let's say I was setting up an LLC in Washington State. Now, Washington's not one of those, but assume it was, where Washington didn't ask for who the members or managers are. I would still use this same structure here. But when I create this entity here, I'm going to list Tom as the manager, and I'm going to make it a manager managed LLC. And that way I won't have to use an officer in this one. I'll just have Tom listed as the manager, and then he has complete control. And so what hopefully you're picking up on this is that it's not a one size fits all. You need to know where you're setting up the LLC, what type of information is going to be requested by the state. Once you know that, then what you determine is, all right, if they don't request any information, it's going to be a manager-managed LLC with my Wyoming LLC as the member. If they do request information, then it's going to be a member-managed LLC with my Wyoming LLC as the member manager. But first, the operating agreement is going to show me as the initial member manager, and I'm going to be listed as a president. So we're covering the anonymity side, but we're also working on that other side, the business side, because I have conversations with people a lot where they come up to me with their clients, platinum clients, and they're asking me via email, can I do this? Can I do that? You can do it, but you also have to keep in mind that you need to conduct business with certain types of entities in a certain manner. And you don't want to take it to a point where you're completely anonymous, because then you may and again, you can be completely anonymous with certain things, but with active businesses, you got to be careful on how far you take it. And that's why we typically evaluate it with a client when we're looking at what they want to do, and we make recommendations as, well, maybe in this scenario, anonymity may not be your friend. Here's a perfect example of that. Somebody a couple months ago wants to build business credit with their LLC. And they wanted me to create a structure for them where their name didn't appear anywhere on the entity and set it up like I just showed you. And I told them, I go, you're going to have a really difficult time building your business credit if it's not associated back to you, because that's how it starts out when you're building the business credit. So you need to know those third parties or what you're doing so we can help you get to your end goal. So we're setting up the structure accordingly. All right. So that's how you would do. That's how you set it up with a limited liability company to obtain anonymity. Now, as far as the structuring is concerned, if it's rental real estate that you own, we're going to do it this way. Boom, boom, boom. And then you're going to be down here, just like this as the member. Now, 3 days ago, somebody on on the YouTube channel put in a question. They said, well, how, I don't want to own it. I want to have my IRA own it. Okay, well, if you're not going to own it, you're going to invest through your IRA and you want anonymity, well, then let's just make your self-directed IRA the sole member of the blue box. Cool. You still get the anonymity. It works. You could just take you out. Another scenario that I dealt with several months ago. This guy was flipping property, right? He'd been flipping property for years through this company, Colorado Inc. So his name was all over the company. And so every time he flipped real estate, people knew that he was involved with the flip. He didn't want that because he had some seller or buyers that were just pains in the butt. And it happens, especially now. If you're flipping real estate, I would highly encourage you to consider this strategy I'm about to share with you, because one of my clients, I mean, she made 2 mistakes in her flip, all right? Excuse me. She made 1 major mistake on this flip. You know what that was? Selling property to 2 attorneys. Actually, it's 2. Okay, never sell or rent property to an attorney, because you're probably going to get sued. All right, why are you going to get sued? Because that's what they do, and they always say, I'm just going to use the legal process and beat you down and make you give me back money or something like that. I don't have to pay your rent because you haven't done this or this or that with regards to this property. Well, she flipped property, and they're coming back and they're suing her limited liability company. And they're just making up stuff. It's just purely a shakedown in this particular case with my client. And just to reiterate, how do I know it's a shakedown? Because they're suing a limited liability company that has been dissolved for several months. They didn't even go to check to see if that LLC is still in existence. They served the RA on an entity that has been dissolved. They just basically shaking people down. So anyways, if you have a flip and you want to have anonymity, then you just set it up this way. You have your Inc. here, own an LLC that's in Wyoming that's disregarded. And then you create your Colorado LLCs up here for each of your individual flips as follows. And then once you flip the property, you shut it down. What does this do for you? Well, let's say you got a disgruntled buyer right here, and they want to know who the ultimate seller is, who's really sold them the property. Well, if they look at this LLC here, it points into this LLC here, and then it goes nowhere at that point in time. So there's a benefit to using this in all types of real estate transactions. Now, if you want to take it even one step further in protecting your anonymity, we'll do this. We'll create structures where we have the property as follows down into here. Now, you've got this LLC with anonymity of ownership, but here's the issue. You have $200,000 in equity in the property. Okay. Now, you want to really discourage people from coming after you, make the equity disappear. So what do you got to do to make equity disappear? Well, you can go down and get an equity line of credit. You can find a lender that's willing to loan against your investment property. For some of us, that's challenging. Not a lot of lenders like to do that, especially QM lenders. You got to work with non-QM lenders. But another strategy that we like to use is we'll create a separate limited liability company right here. So this is a separate Wyoming LLC like this. Again, you have to use anonymity to make this structure really play out. And then we'll enter into a line of credit agreement with the red box that owns the property for $200,000. And we'll take back a promissory note, and then we'll record a first or second deed of trust against this asset. So now, if something were to go wrong with it, and this disgruntled tenant approaches an attorney and they say, hey, I want to go after this landlord, this limited liability company. He looks at the house, and the attorney would find the house is valued at $350,000. It has $150,000 debt with a community bank. There's another $200,000 in debt on the property with some obscure LLC out of Wyoming. That means there's 0 equity. Now you say, all right, well, let's see if we can bring pressure on the owners of the property, because we'll name them in the lawsuit as well, just to shake them down and get them to meet our demands. They look at the LLC and they see this Wyoming LLC here. Wow. Not a lot of traction on this deal. And sometimes what I've told people in the past too is that if you want to use this type of strategy with the line of credit, and we call this a friendly lien strategy. If you're going to use a friendly lien strategy, I personally like to change this one over here. I like to use something a little different. I'll use a Delaware LLC because this one's in Wyoming to separate them out. I think it looks stronger to a third party that you don't see both of these entities. That is the Wyoming that owns this, and then the entity that's filing the lien also in the same state. So I like to separate them out and put them in different states. Choice is yours. I mean, the reason why sometimes people don't go with Delaware is a little more expensive on the annual filing fees, but you just got to balance that. And again, you would just use this against every single property you own. So that's how you set up limited liability companies for anonymity. They work great. Trusts are also beneficial as well. So if you want to go, if you're thinking about using a land trust for your investing, then what we'll do with a land trust, and when are you going to use a land trust? Typically, you'd be looking at using land trust where there's a transfer tax to move property directly into an LLC. So let's say it was in your name, then you want to put it into a limited liability company. That's when you might use a land trust. Florida, we use them all the time down there. If you're buying at auction, great time to use a land trust. Subject to deals, great time to use land trusts. So there are compelling reasons why we use land trust. Tennessee, we use land trust a lot because of the fonts tax there. So whatever the case is, with the land trust here, all you have to remember is this. The beneficiaries of a land trust, which are the owners, their information is completely private because a land trust is a private document. It's not recorded anywhere. The only thing that's going to get recorded on title is the trust name and the trustee. So when I set up a land trust, I want to make sure that my name is not listed here as trustee. And I see, guys, a lot of questions are coming. I'm going to get to those questions here in about 10 minutes or less. I'll start hitting all your questions. So when I set up this land trust, I don't want the beneficiary and the trustee to be the same people. Because if we had Karen down here, Karen setting up a land trust with me, and she said, Clint, I want to be the trustee of my trust, I would tell Karen, Karen, this isn't going to work because we're going to deed the property from your name, Karen, to Karen as trustee of the Green Turtle Trust, right? Nothing there, right? We know you're involved. So the key is Karen, we got to get rid of you. You can't be there. You cannot serve you as your own trustee. So who's going to be your trustee? All right. If it's your personal residence, you want to use I would use a nominee trustee like an attorney. I'm probably on, 7,000, 8,000 different trusts. Who knows? There's so many of them. I receive text messages, emails, phone calls every week. I was thinking maybe I'd show you my cell phone. But the point is they're always coming in, hey, Clint, you want to sell this property? You want to talk to you about this property or that property? I don't know where these properties are located, but what they're doing is they're pulling up title and they're seeing my name listed as trustee and they assume I own the property. I don't own that property. In fact, I've already resigned. So when I start off, it'll say Clint as trustee of the Green Turtle Trust. Once we sign the deed, Karen signs the deed transferring to Clint as trustee of the Green Turtle Trust, I resign and I appoint Karen as trustee. This is all private. No one knows about this. The only way any of this comes up or Karen will ever show up on title is if she chooses to put her name back on title. And how would she do that? Well, when I resign, I provide Karen a trustee's deed. And so if you're using this technique and you're using a third party, an individual, to be your nominee trustee, what you always must ask for, you have to get this, it's called a trustee's deed. And a trustee's deed is a deed from the nominee to you as the property owner, appointing you as the trustee of the trust. And so you just hold on to that deed until you're ready to sell the property or do something with the property. Then you're going to drop your anonymity shield. You're going to go down and record the deed, and then Karen's name will spring up on that trust. And the reason you have to do that is so that you can deal with title, right? Escrow. You'll deal with the realtor, whatever. They have to see your name there. Now, I like using this strategy for a personal residence. And the reason I say that I like to have an attorney there is because there's attorney-client privilege. And so it can give you a little additional protections. But when you're dealing with rental property where you're going to be more active, because I definitely don't want to be too active in dealing with this stuff because I have other things that I'm working on, my own real estate deals. I tell people, consider setting up a Wyoming LLC here to be the trustees of your land trust. So now you don't even need to go through this process. Karen, if she set up the Blue Box Trust, she would have list Blue Box Trust as trustee of the Green Turtle Trust, just like that. Now her Blue Box can be the trustee of all of her land trusts that she creates as follows. Now somebody asked me a question not too long ago. They said, well, Clint, wait a minute. If we did that, they're going to know I'm involved because they'll see that I'm signing on behalf of the LLC. Well, remember, when you deed property, when Karen deeds property to the trust in the name of the Blue Box trustee, Karen is the grantor. The trust is the grantee. Grantees do not sign the deed. It is only the grantor that signs the deed. So your information is not going to be disclosed that you're connected to this trust here via the deed. And so what happens when you look at title now in this piece of property that's held inside of there, it'll say Blue Box trustee of the Green Turtle Trust. Well, who's involved with Blue Box? I don't know. Who's the beneficiary of the trust? I don't know. It's not, none of that information is public. So land trusts are a very effective way to create anonymity as well. Great for personal residence, and they're great to be used in those states that tax transfers. So you still want the anonymity, but it's a taxable transfer. Another tool that we'll use is called a Wyoming statutory trust. So it's a business entity, it's a business trust that's set up in Wyoming. So we set up this statutory trust in Wyoming, and you do the exact same thing. You create your Wyoming LLC as the trustee of your WST as follows. And then when you take title to property, you transfer it in, it would say Blue Box trustee of the Green Acres statutory trust, something like that. Now, why would I use this versus an LLC or a land trust? It just depends on where you're investing or where you live. I mean, for example, if you're going to invest in Oregon or you own property there and you say, Clint, I want anonymity for Oregon. Well, I'll tell you, hey, can't use an LLC in Oregon because Oregon, they require you to disclose who's behind the entire veil. So I can't structure you with LLCs with anonymity, but what I can do is I can set up a statutory trust. It isn't required to disclose what the LLC is required to disclose. So we can use statutory trusts where LLCs don't work. In a statutory trust, like I said, it's a business trust. So if something goes wrong with the asset, the trust protects you. So that's something to look at using a statutory trust. If you have an existing entity and you want anonymity. So many times this is what happens. We set up structures like this. And our client has what I call maybe an orphan LLC that they set up on their own. They completely screwed it up. Their name's all over it. And they say, Clint, can you fix this? Well, there's two ways we can go about fixing it. We could dissolve it. You know, if you're a titanium client, I would just tell you to dissolve the LLC. And what I would do is as follows. I would create a land trust right here. And I would have a trustee LLC set up to be on that land trust. And then I would deed your property out of the existing LLC and into the trust. So that's going to give you anonymity. And that transfer, okay, it's not going to be taxable. It's going to go into the trust. The trust now holds the property. So if somebody looked at title, they would see it was held here. Now it's held here. We don't know who's involved with it. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take that land trust and we're going to move it and transfer the beneficial interest and park it over here under new LLC that falls under our structure. And then we dissolve this LLC and get rid of it, take it out of the picture completely. That's one way to take existing entities that don't provide anonymity, shut them down and transfer your property without someone seeing the fact that, oh, property went from entity to me, and then from me back to entity. That doesn't look good. So that's option number one. Option number two is to take that little orphan LLC that we have over here. We get our client's information completely off of it. So we change the RA over to us, or you do it to a third party. You change your business address, get that fixed. And then the members, you change to what we call a personal property trust. So you set up a personal property trust, which again, doesn't have to file a tax return. It's completely anonymous. It's an anonymity trust. And then this entity here now points to here. And then you take the personal property trust and you move it into the blue box. What if someone's looking at this LLC, what do they see? They see the LLC and they see this. They have no idea where this personal property trust sits. They don't even know who's involved with this as well, because on the Secretary of State's website, all we list is the trust name. They're not going to know who the trustee is. They know nothing about it. So that's another way, if you have an existing entity and you're looking at working to build up an anonymity structure, how you can go about doing it and incorporating that entity in. What you would never do, and I've seen this mistake happen before, and you're going to let the camel into the tent if you do this strategy. You set up this beautiful structure right here for anonymity, and it's all tight and buttoned up, and then you take this entity and you move it into this blue box directly. And on your statement of information the following year, the member is going to change from Fred to blue box. You just gave it away. Because anybody who researches this entity would see Fred was there, now it's blue box. Once they figure out blue box is tied to Fred, then we just say, all right, what is blue box tied to? And you find it's tied to this one, this one, and this one. That's a mistake. So never take your existing structure and throw it into your blue box directly. Always, if you want to tie it in, use a personal property trust right down here. So that's what I would avoid. You can also do, so if you have an existing business, say you had a business set up here that's managing your properties. You have an LLC you want to create to be a property manager. Since this is going to be filed in the state in which you're located, let's say it's in Texas. So I want to create a separate property management entity, but I don't want the tenants to know that I own it. So that's a bit of a concern. So what we'll do in that scenario is we have our real estate set up here, all pointing to here. We're not going to take this management entity and tie it down to here, because you're associated with this management entity. And I think it's too close of a relationship that if somebody were to see, hey, Clint's associated with this entity is associated with this entity, and this entity here is associated with this one, and this one. You might be able to draw the conclusion there that Clint's associated with all of it. So the way we can provide protection here, if you want anonymity for this Texas LLC in this example, you set up the Texas LLC so it's held by a personal property trust. So the personal property trust will give you the anonymity for the Texas LLC. So when you're out there and you're operating on behalf of this Texas LLC, you can say, hey, I'm a president. I work for this company. I'm managing these properties. So tenants, don't be mad at me if you're not happy with your landlord. I just do what I'm told. And if they looked at this company to see, is Clint the owner, they're not going to see that. They're going to see this personal property trust, and they can't see through this. This is just like this, just mud. They're not going to see past that. So, there's probably more ways that I can't even think of it at the top of my head right now, because we're limited on time. We only got an hour today. But there's a lot of strategies around anonymity, and I think you'd be remiss in your planning if you're not using it. Because as I started out talking about, the thing about anonymity, which is so compelling, is that you force people to settle. I've got some great client testimonials. I don't know if you've all been to my TAP event, my asset protection workshop that I teach every other week, every other Saturday. You can register for it on my YouTube channel. In the notes, you can see there's a link there. So I have a client come on, and she talks about a situation where she was involved in a lawsuit. And we're talking multi-million dollars here, $15 million plaintiffs were seeking against her and her businesses and stuff like that. And she'd made an investment with me to provide anonymity for all their business enterprises. And we set something up that, I mean, I was really happy when we got done with it. And they get sued. They settled for their policy limits. The plaintiff took the $1 million policy and left them alone because when they ran an asset search, they couldn't find anything. Now, there was another defendant. So there were two defendants here. Defendant number 2 happened to be the dad of these individuals, her husband. He owned the building. He, unfortunately, in this situation, could not extricate himself from the lawsuit for his policy limits, and he was the least liable, culpable party. I mean, in any other state other than California, you wouldn't have been able to maintain a case against him, but California screwed up. They let you sue anybody. So they were able to move forwards against him, and when he tried to settle, here's what they said, verbatim. We've done an asset search on your name, and we found that you're worth at least $15, $20 million here in Los Angeles County, just in real estate alone. Why would we accept a settlement of your policy limits? That's what anonymity can do for you. We have my clients worth far more than their father. They settle for policy limits because they appear to not own anything, whereas the father kept everything in his own name. That's what you're going for. The whole point about anonymity is you don't end up in the lawsuit, or if you do get involved in a lawsuit, it's over relatively quickly, and they take the policy limits and they go away. Because I can tell you what, you don't want 2 to 3 years of stress in your life of having to deal with that, not to mention the expense. I mean, a lot of times people think about expense as the worst part of a lawsuit. Being an attorney, I don't think that's such a bad idea, right? Because I'm the one getting paid. But it's really the emotion. That's the problem when it comes to that. And if you've been sued before, you know what I'm talking about. First 2 or 3 times, it's highly emotional. The 7th time, you're like, who gives a crap? Anyways, I know there's been a ton of questions you guys have been throwing at me here. So I'm going to start going through this. Some of them are not quite on topic, but it's all right. That's why you're here today. So here's a question. It says, can you 1031 property in a trust? Absolutely, you can 1031 property in a trust. There is no problem with doing a 1031 property in a trust. I've done many of them with my clients. All right, here's another one. So, Wyoming LLC holds New Jersey LLC that holds a rental. Rents are paid to the New Jersey LLC, and then the money moves back to the Wyoming LLC. Isn't that considered doing business in New Jersey? If so, do I have to file the Wyoming LLC tax in New Jersey state? No, you don't in this scenario, because in this scenario, the New Jersey limited liability company is doing business in that state. It's going to be paying the tax. You live in New Jersey, so the income tax, I don't know if New Jersey has an income tax, it's all going to get picked up on your 1040. You'll be paying tax on that income. By using the Wyoming LLC, you're not getting out of any tax that's owed to the state in which you reside. All right. Illinois, here we go. Illinois, not Illinois. Illinois LLC has a Wyoming LLC as the member, but the Illinois requires a natural person to sign the annual report. How do I file the report if I do not have to sign my name and my title? Well, see, that's just the problem. Fatal, whenever you're using these types of structures, you can't do it on your own. It's just extremely difficult to set this stuff up and maintain it on your own. If you want anonymity, you're gonna have to use a third party. That's why, we've been really successful in creating these types of structures all over the country for individual investors and providing them rock solid anonymity, because we keep all their information. They're off the public records. I mean, think about this, your tax records, right? Where do your tax statements go when you transfer property in? You don't want them going to your personal address because people can search you via your tax statements. So that's why we provide mail forwarding to our clients. We just forward these statements on as they come in. So all the tax statements come to our office, and then we send them out to our client. And so setting up the anonymity is it takes someone that's familiar with it to really build a good sound structure. And then you can do stuff like what happened at the end of last year. I had a client. Here's what we did. This client lives in California, and they were getting a equity loan against their house. They were pulling out $750,000. Well, we'd set up a land trust with myself as the initial trustee. He and his wife were the beneficiaries. I resigned. They stepped in as the trustee of the trust. So they took back over when I resigned. Let's say we did all of this in 2018. Well, here we are in 2021. And they decide they want to pull, they have huge equity in this house. They want to pull out $750,000, $800,000 equity. So they don't want to pull the property out and put it in their own name and do a refi on it. They want to keep it in the trust so the property never hits their name. So they called me up and they said, Clint, this is what we want to do. Will you go back on as trustee? No problem. So then we just reversed it. They reappointed me as trustee of their land trust. So I stepped back in. They were dealing with Mellon Bank out of New York to put this deal together. Mellon Bank then sent out a notary with all of the closing paperwork, and I had to sign off on all the closing docs for this loan because the trust is the owner. Now, I didn't sign the promissory note. There's no way in hell I'm going to do that, right? But I signed off on all the closing docs because the bank needed the trustee of the trust to encumber the trust asset, which I did. And so my clients, as the beneficiaries of the trust, signed the promissory note, got the deal done. The money was paid into the trust. My clients had a bank account set up in the name of the trust. I resigned my position again, reappointed them as trustees of their trust, and the rest is history. So you can do stuff like this and still have, you can transact business and still keep your anonymity in place. In that case, had to be a lender that's willing and understands how these things work. All right. There we go. I'm under contract to purchase a rental property, and the title company lawyer wants to see the operating agreement for my LLC. What should I have done? I'm one of your clients. Well, so you're going to have to, the title company lawyer is always going to want to see the operating agreement. They want to make sure that you are authorized to engage in this particular transaction. So if you're using an anonymity structure, like I just showed you, then what can happen, oftentimes what will occur is you can contact them and say, all right, when they see it, that they come back to you. You say, do you need a letter from my attorney specifying that I am the one authorized and I have the power to close on this transaction? They'll say yes, or they want a resolution. So there's many ways that we can solve that issue for you. And most of the time, it's just a letter from an attorney indicating that you are authorized to engage in this transaction. I've done that multiple times. We're just used to doing it. So if that's the case, send them the docs. They're going to need to see the docs. You might want to do this, though. If you don't want to go down that road, maybe we amend your operating agreement. I don't know how it's set up to list you as the member on that operating agreement. That could get it done as well. So if they get the operating agreement, shows you're there as a member of that LLC, that would work. But I really have to know more about your file. Thanks for being a client. I appreciate it. And reach out to our legal staff, and we can definitely help you on that. Okay. Property trust held by Trust LLC, held by Holding LLC. If a third-party property manager manages property in the trust, does the Trust LLC need to be registered in the same state as the property? No, the Trust LLC does not need to be registered in the same state as the property, because a Trust LLC does not get paid for its services. And you would see in our statutory trust or the land trust agreement, there is no compensation allowed to be paid to a trustee. Hi, I'm in the process of buying a rental property under my LLC, and I had to provide my operating agreement under a single sole member, and I'm the manager. My hard money loan lender accepted it as well. Absolutely, that's pretty common. I got a great testimonial from another client on an LLC we put together similar to yours, a JV LLC that helped them get a deal done. So I'm glad to hear it. How can I put a friendly lien on an out-of-state property held in an LLC owned by my Wyoming LLC? The state uses a deed of trust. So the way you put a friendly lien on your LLC is you will record a deed of trust against the property. So you have to record a deed of trust against the property by that out-of-state limited liability company. So it's going to be the beneficiary. You're going to have a trustee. Typically, a title company is going to serve as the trustee under that deed of trust. And that would secure it. But in order to back it up, you need to have a promissory note and you want to do a line of credit agreement. So you got to have those two documents, right? You don't have to loan the money. You just have to have the line of credit agreement and the promissory note. So if you do loan money, there's basis for securing the interest. My business partner and I put down $10K for the earnest money yesterday, and we don't have the money for the down payment. I thought I was going to get cash out of my other property for the down, but do not. Not sure if there was a question there. All right. Great question here. Why always does Clint talk about Wyoming, Delaware? Why not Arizona or New Mexico? Well, it comes down to Arizona. You're going to, if I recall, you have to disclose in Arizona. So your information is going to get listed there if we use Arizona. And so we can't get anonymity. New Mexico, you can obtain anonymity. But the problem with New Mexico, well, let me rephrase this. New Mexico can be used as your trustee on an LLC. If you want to use a trustee LLC, New Mexico serves really great for that. But I wouldn't use it for my holding limited liability company because its asset protection laws. I mean, here's what the other benefit of this structure that we're looking at is when you have a Wyoming LLC here and you get sued, you have what are called strong charging order protections, which means if somebody wanted to come after you personally and try to break your LLC and force you to distribute the assets, that's not happening in Wyoming. New Mexico doesn't have as strong as protections as Wyoming. They will allow creditors to get into there. So we do not use New Mexico as our holding companies. We want to stick with Wyoming, Delaware, states that have strong charging order protections. Now, as a trustee LLC is concerned, hey, I've set up a number of New Mexico LLCs for clients that want to use that jurisdiction as their trustee, and it's fine. But you just want to make sure whenever you're setting up a structure, you're setting one up that makes sure you're maximizing every benefit you can. All right. So, okay, Shaw, Bay, you're scared of your mind. I'm going to lose the earnest money. Does anyone know of a good lender for a down payment? You know, what you might want to look for is a non-qualified mortgage, okay? Non-QM lenders that are out there, and see if that doesn't help you out. Do some Google search terms for that'll loan on real estate. You might have to pay a little more, but sometimes, it depends on how much you have down. That's going to factor into it as well, but you have to look, you can look for that. Gary says, I live in Florida and I use Florida Land Trust to manage a Florida LLC and still keep my ownership hidden. Can I use a Florida Land Trust to manage a Florida LLC and still keep my ownership hidden? So I think what you're asking me, Gary, is could you set up a structure where you have a Florida limited liability company and you're going to use a Florida Land Trust down here, and this is member managed by the Florida Land Trust. Yeah, you could probably do that because if you list the trust on the Florida LLC, your name wouldn't appear there. Now, here's the only drawback to doing this. If you just list the trust name, okay, so this trust name here is Big Chicken Trust. All right, so you got the Big Chicken Trust, and you're going to list that as the member of this LLC. So if somebody looks at your LLC, all they see is Big Chicken Trust, managing member. If you don't list a trustee in the name of your trust title, such as Gary Jenkins, trustee of the Big Chicken Trust, you could have someone who wants to steal your identity kind of step in and try to use your company as their own, because there's no way for someone to say, hey, well, Big Chicken Trust, who's involved with Big Chicken Trust? We don't know who the trustee is. I could draft the Big Chicken Trust tomorrow and say Clint Coons is a trustee, go to a third party and say, yeah, this is my LLC. Here's a copy of my Big Chicken Trust agreement. So there's some consideration you want to give to that. You could do it. I just want you to be aware of the fact that if you don't list the trustee here, that is just a minor issue that you might want to consider. I live in Philadelphia and I want to buy property in Philly and Cincinnati. Is Delaware the best option for the PA and Ohio LLC or Wyoming? You know, when you were setting up this blue box here, I tend to always go with Wyoming because it's less expensive. I will use Delaware if I'm going to use a series. So if I want anonymity and I plan to set up a series LLC, so I've done this before. I set up a Delaware series LLC with various cells like this. And then I have a land trust established. Say this would be a perfect Tennessee structure. If you have rental real estate in Tennessee and you want to avoid having to pay their franchise tax, you would set something up like this. Wyoming LLC here as trustee, like that. Beneficiary of all these land trusts are different cells that are all owned by the Delaware LLC. You own the Delaware LLC. In that structure right there, I could set up, you don't have to file a single federal tax return for any of that. Oh, I should have taken that off the board there so you can see. So that would be a Tennessee style structure, because in Tennessee, the concerns we have would be that you have to pay a franchise tax if you want anonymity with your structure. So we have to work around that, give you the same anonymity, give you anonymity and asset protection. So why did I choose Delaware versus Wyoming in this scenario? Because Delaware, to set up a series LLC in Delaware, it's less expensive than Wyoming is, because Wyoming, you have to record each cell. Delaware doesn't require that. So we go back and forth. Again, we're looking at what is in the best interest of the client. How do we keep those annual maintenance costs down by looking for a solution to create a structure that's going to give them the anonymity and the asset protection on an annual basis. All right. Let me see what else we got here. If I rent in multiple roommates, all right, so this person's engaged in, Nikita's in house hacking. So she's got her house, she's renting out rooms. What's the best way to protect the property from potential lawsuits, like a slip and fall, for example? You see, when you're engaging in house hacking, it's really difficult to protect that property from, your roommates basically hurting themselves, having a party and their friends getting hurt and you getting sued. So if you're going to house hack, then what I would look at doing is equity stripping. Make it appear that house isn't worth going after because there's no equity involved in it, or there's no equity available. I would also get the house out of my name, so if somebody did get hurt and they wanted to sue, it's held by a single member LLC like this. The house is in here. You could do that, and then you have another entity here if you want to do an equity strip, like I just showed you, to make the equity disappear. If you don't have a lot of equity in it right now, don't worry about this. It doesn't make sense to do that. Just get it out of your name, and at least you're going to have some protection from whatever goes on with the property. All right. See what else. Here we go. Robert. When does it become necessary, or when do you recommend to put assets into a family limited partnership? Robert, I don't ever recommend limited partnerships unless you live in Canada and you're investing in the US. Plain and simple. The LLC is a much better tool than the limited partnership, and it's easier to operate. So I don't use them. We used to a long time ago, but we don't anymore. Here's one from Andy. If Wyoming LLC holding company just holding money and titles is being managed by a California resident. Does it still have to pay the $800 franchise fee? Andy, in California, if you're a resident of California and you set up an LLC here on the moon, okay, and you live in California, California will tell you this entity is doing business in California, must pay $800. So the answer to your question is yes, it does. You want to avoid that? Then do this. Set up a Wyoming statutory trust and you just solved your problem. Now, people who set up LLCs outside the state of California, if they're treated as disregarded LLCs, nothing's ever reported, so California doesn't typically find out. Now, I have to tell you, you got to file the franchise form. I can't tell you, oh yeah, do this and don't file it. I'm just telling you what you're obligated to do, but I'm also going to tell you what a lot of people do, is that they don't, because they use disregarded structures, so nothing shows up on their tax return. That would give rise to this. Noble, great question. Do these strategies work for non-real estate business structuring? Absolutely they do. I was just using real estate as the example. It works for any type of business entity. But here's the thing. Keep in mind, you want to talk to someone knowledgeable about using these strategies to make sure it's not going to impair your business. That is your ability to grow and deal with third parties. So there are certain situations I tell people, anonymity is your enemy and not your friend. So you got to be careful there on how it's deployed. Now, I always joke around. Some people come up to me and they say, I don't want my name on anything. I don't want anybody to know I have business or I'm associated with this business. And I say, well, then what are you going to do? Walk around and hand out a business card that has a big question mark on it like you're the Riddler? Who are you? None of your damn business. And then you hand them a card and you say, contact me if you want to do business. I mean, that's just crazy, right? JJ, if you're listed as president of Redbox, during discovery, if sued, could they figure it out? Yeah, JJ, here's the thing. The anonymity is to keep you out of going through that entire process. If you get drug into a lawsuit and they start digging and you get brought into supplemental proceedings at the very end because a judgment's entered against you, yep, you got to own up, and and that information's going to come out. But many times, just by the fact the way you're structured, it doesn't go that far. I'd say probably 99.9% of the times it's not going there, in my experience. LV, can you 1031 a property in a trust if it's your primary residence? Okay, so if it's your primary residence, you're not going to be 1031 in the property because it's not an investment property. So you need to first turn it into an investment property and rent it out. Some of these questions about how you watch the video, again, it'll be on my channel. Can you elaborate on what a nominee manager officer is and how do you set this up and what are they? So you don't have a nominee officer. What you're doing is you're setting up your LLC and you're appointing yourself as a president of that LLC. So you have what we refer to as a parent authority. So you can go out there, if somebody asks you, well, how do we know you can transact business on behalf of the LLC? Because I'm its president. Well, what proof do you have of that? How about my operating agreement that indicates that I'm the president of the LLC? That's what we're doing there. So there, it isn't a nominee position. It's an actual position that we're using. Rose, if my EIN is in my name and address, can that be reversed to an address not connected to me personally? Well, we can't take your name off of that. And the address portion of that as well, I don't know. I mean, you could change your business address for the tax return, but I don't think you can change it for the EIN. I'm not sure if you could. Can I get an LLC in Hawaii, but have that LLC own the trust in Los Angeles? Yes, you could. Should I create a Hawaii or Wyoming for California, and when I need to pay an LLC fee in California? So I think what you're asking me is this, Nikita. Could you set up a structure where in California you use a land trust and you point that land trust back here to a Wyoming LLC? Yes, you can do that. We have clients that have done that many, many times. So that strategy does work. And of course, you don't live in California, so this LLC is not required. I assume you did. I thought you live in Hawaii. This LLC does not have to, you don't have to pay franchise tax. You're not obligated to pay a franchise tax in the state of California. Why do people elect to use this? So that, they got the land trust that owns a property. If something goes wrong here, liability flows down here, you're down here, and you're protected. So that's how it works. All right. Holly. What to do when removed trustee opened LLC and irrevocable grantor Q-tip trust created LLC inside trust only member. This is a little more engaged than I can answer for you, Holly. I'm sorry. This is going to take a strategy session with someone at Anderson to go through that. It seems like, I can just tell you by just glancing at it, I think you're going to need an attorney to back you up. Sorry. All right. I do house hacking and pretend to my roommates that I'm just the main tenant, collects the rent, and pays the property manager. Smedley, love it. Make sure you're protected though, right? Because if they did look at title, they might see your name there. So get the asset on your name. Maybe put it in a land trust so you have anonymity. Okay, time for 2 more here. I'm in Georgia looking to get a HELOC to upgrade the current home before selling or taking in boarders. Would it be best to set up the LLC before doing anything? No. First thing you want to do, if you're going to get a traditional HELOC on that property, get all the debt stuff done first, then come back and consider setting up a structure. You don't want to set up the structure beforehand. It's just going to, because it's residential real estate, you're going to be using qualified mortgage lenders. Typically, you don't want to go down that road right now. Wait until it's done. One more here. But can you make the property in the trust an investment property for yourself, as in an entity is a beneficiary and you pay the beneficiary monthly rent? You probably, maybe what I would do, again, LV, this is going back to the question. So you have a personal residence and you want to do a 1031 exchange on it. So what you need to do is make it an investment property. So it hits your tax return as an investment property, shows up on Schedule E, page 1 for at least, a year is what I would suggest. So you don't want somebody else moving into that property and maybe destroying it on you or making it more difficult or lowering its property value. Maybe rent it to your corporation. Set up a corporation, rent to the corporation that you, or a business, if you have a business. Just remember, if you're doing that, you're actually taking in money now that you're putting in the business to pay back to yourself. It could be you're creating double taxation on it. I think the cleanest route, if you wanted to do it, is to move out of it, treat it as an investment property. That's going to be your cleanest route. Now, whether or not anybody rents it from you is not relevant. You don't actually have to receive rental income. You just have to be trying to rent it, and you must show the intent to treat it as an investment. So that's the rule there. Daniel, can you transfer assets from one LLC to the other without consequences? Yes, you can, Daniel. You can, if you've got the LLCs, like this, and you want to move assets between these two, let's say it's real estate, all right? If you want to move real estate, I showed you a strategy, set up a land trust, move it into a land trust, then flip the land trust over. If it's cash, you can move cash like this. You don't want to go this way with cash because then you're blurring the distinction between the two entities as far as asset protection is concerned. All right, guys, I went a little bit over. Hey, I want to thank you for joining me. I hope you got a lot out of this as far as the anonymity is concerned with regard to setting all this stuff up. As you can see, it can get a little complicated, but when you're working with someone who understands it, we're going to guide you through that entire process. If you haven't joined me on one of my real estate tax and asset protection events, I highly encourage you. I got a few more planned before the end of the year. And if you don't see me and I don't have the opportunity to say it, I wish you a very safe and happy holidays. Take care, everyone.